Hit points are an interesting concept, an interesting innovation. War games never used them, except insofar as your army's hit points were its soldiers. We get hit points along with armor class from an old Civil War game by the legendary Tom Wham called Ironclads. When your game is about two metal ships firing cannonballs at each other, a battle that in the real world ended because neither ship could really hurt the other, hit points make sense. The ship is fine, this is fine, everything's fine. Oh, I sank. Game over. Gamers have considered hit points offensive since almost the beginning of the hobby. They don't appear to model anything. They don't appear to have any bearing on anything. Because a high constitution gets you more of them, and taking damage causes you to lose them, gamers have always assumed they were basically analogous to physical hardiness and stamina. And of course they did. People are not like Ironclads, where everything works fine until that last attack delivers a fatal blow. People get tired, they bleed, they lose the use of their limbs and organs way before they collapse. As a result, one of the first, and for decades, most popular hacks for D&D was wound levels. You take your total HP and divide them into about 5 levels. As you take damage, you drop from one level to the other, and each level after the first imposes some kind of penalty on you as you run out of stamina and lose steam and deal with all the wounds you've accumulated. This is much more realistic, everyone says, and of course it is. Yes, that is basically how it would work. This design is called a death spiral because once you start losing in a system like this, you accumulate penalties, which causes you to lose faster. In other words, the rate at which you are losing begins to increase. It took about 30 years and 2 or 3 generations of gamers before everyone collectively grew out of trying to fix something that had never been a problem. Hit points work because that's how we wished we worked. It's how pulp heroes work. John McClane runs barefoot over broken glass, but he's basically fine. Takes a short rest to pick the glass out of his feet with no apparent loss of effectiveness. He's fine. There's a great video from Tim Kask, which I'll put a link to in a card, where he uses a famous sword fight from Game of Thrones to describe how the original D&D nerds imagined hit points worked. One character swings her sword, and the other character has to bend over backwards to avoid being hit. Kask describes that moment as, in D&D terms, a hit. If the defender hadn't burned some hit points to stay in the fight, that attack would have ended them. That's what losing hit points is supposed to look like. You pull a crazy stunt to stay in the fight, and when you run out of stunt points, the next attack takes you down. I think we could simulate that pretty easily if, after we hit and roll damage, we tell the player, that blow would have killed you, but you, and invite the player to describe the stunt they used to stay in the game. Hit points are a meaningful innovation, a great invention, because they have no bearing on your character's abilities. You are just as effective with 72 hit points as with 2. There's no way for someone to tell, based on what you can do, how many hit points you have. For this reason, when someone asks what hit points actually represent, I often answer, they are a measure of your heroism. The more you have, the longer you can go on being a hero. But they're also a measure of how close you are from death, another useful way of looking at it. In fact, that's sort of the only thing they measure. While you have hit points, you're fine. When you lose them, you're boned. I think this design actually encourages a lot of foolhardy behavior without the players even realizing it. Because nothing bad has actually happened to you, in spite of losing 90% of your hit points, you're more likely to press on. We are more likely to take actually stupid risks because of this. Things, regardless of how heroic our characters are, they would never actually do. The result is, characters die. Hey everybody, Matt Colville here, and we're going to talk about character death in D&D and how to deal with it from the DM's point of view. There are 3 basic ways your character can die in D&D. You can take so much damage you end up with a negative number equal to your maximum hit points. If your character normally has 34 hit points and you ever for any reason drop to negative 34, you die. I don't think that's very common except at low levels, but it does happen. And it's no coincidence we're talking about this right after talking about fudging die rolls, because this is when you fudge die rolls. You've got the d20 in your hand, and you're like, this Iron Golem could easily do 40 damage if it hits twice this round. Maybe I misjudged the power level of the PCs. Maybe I shouldn't have thrown an Iron Golem at 3 first-level heroes. The second way is to fail 3 death saves while unconscious. I think this is probably how most characters die, especially when you know that taking any damage while unconscious causes you to instantly add a failure to your death save total. And you add 2 failures if it was a critical hit. And here's the tricky thing. While you are unconscious, any attack from someone standing next to you is automatically a critical hit. So you automatically fail 2 out of your 3 death saves if your unconscious character is attacked by someone standing next to them. It doesn't say that in the section on damage. You need to look at the unconscious condition in the back of the book. So it's very likely if you start taking damage while unconscious, you're going to die. I think that's the most common form of death because a lot of creatures in D&D 5 have multi-attack, and that's where things get tricky because if the Iron Golem knocks a PC unconscious with its first attack, what's it going to do next? it's got another attack. This is how these two ways of killing a PC start to blend together into a soup of pain, which I think is a kind of chowder. Your monster has multi-attack and chooses a target. You start by thinking, well, they have 3 attacks, they won't hit with each attack, but they do hit with all 3 attacks, and maybe one of them is a critical. And now you're doing 4 times the monster's normal attack damage to a PC. It will kill them, you're pretty sure. What do? Are you okay with killing a character? Are the players okay with it? I've seen PCs die and no one got upset, usually because the player made some decision they knew ahead of time would likely mean their death. But this is rare. Usually, when a PC dies, it is a traumatic experience. Because players like their characters. They build their characters, they invest time in their characters. A player's character is their window into your world, the adventure, and the party. Killing a PC is tough, and often, in fact, I think usually, the DM feels bad afterwards, and this is not why we play D&D. How did you get to that point? Well, let me ask you a question. Did you ever stop and think about how lethal you intended your game to be? How did you communicate that to your players? Here's another question. Do you know how deadly D&D is intended to be? We know the answer for lots of other games. We know Dark Souls, for instance, is crazy lethal. But D&D? Let's imagine you do your best to play by the rules as written or even intended. How often do you think normal play results in dead characters? Here's my answer. I actually don't know. I have no idea, and I couldn't even find advice for this. I don't know why, but I suspect it's because if they gave advice on how lethal the game should be, then folks would try to make it that lethal, which I think is probably a mistake. And then other folks would complain if it were more or less lethal. So it's probably smart they let each DM decide for themselves. So one thing we as Dungeon Masters should do is think about A, how lethal we expect our game should be, and then B, we should communicate that to our players. But even this, I think it's an incredibly thorny issue, and one not really talked about. Because I don't think any DM, including myself, can really say how lethal their game is going to be. It's just not something the game is designed to calibrate. There are too many variables. I've watched characters die in games where it was clear no one thought mortality was really on the table, including the players, including the DM. Narrative games where players implicitly believed they were building a story, and part of the contract with the DM was that they were going to get to see that story play out. And everyone sat around stunned when someone died. I've run games where I told the players life was cheap in this world, and I routinely threw absurdly difficult encounters at them, and they won. They won every time, and no one died. I've also seen DMs run meat grinder adventures and campaigns where the whole point was the death of PCs. Each square foot of the dungeon, and it's always a dungeon, in these games had to be meticulously tested with 10-foot poles, mirrors used to look around every corner, lots of instant death. Fun, if you know what you're getting into. Maybe this is the talk we should be having with our players. Hey, here's how I view death in my world. It's common or it's rare. I run a very narrative game. You're only likely to die if you do something foolish. I run a very tactical game. You are likely to die if you don't think strategically. But I am not really in control of who dies or how often. It's down to the dice. Again with the dice. I think we should be telling our players, all our players in every game, that regardless of our intent or their behavior, the game is so complex, many encounters, some with many enemies, with many different special abilities, and lots of dice being rolled in each one dozens of times, that with no one intending to, and no one doing anything stupid, characters can die. I'm going to say that again because I think it's important. The game is so complex that with no one doing anything wrong, characters can still die. Everyone needs to understand this. So you've talked to your players about how lethal your game is, and now it's the final battle, pulling out all the stops. In this context, the players know death is an option. This is a boss monster. It's the toughest encounter. This iron golem is about to multi-attack a PC. Everyone knows what that means. Even still, is there anything you can do? You're not obligated in this scenario to pull your punches, but if you decide, hang on, maybe I don't want to kill this PC in this moment, what can be done? You actually have a lot of options, and the good news is they're the same options in every other encounter. Probably the easiest thing you can do to give yourself maximum flexibility is not declare all your attacks before your roll. If you say the Iron Golem is going to attack you 3 times, now the players know that if, after the first one crits and takes someone down, you decide not to attack the unconscious PC 2 more times, you're pulling your punches. You're taking it easy on them. When the players detect this, when they believe they know what the monsters would do, but you're doing something different to keep them alive, they no longer believe their victory is earned. This happens all the time in every game. Players often get a sense that you are pulling your punches, and then they no longer believe in the reality of the secondary world, and you have to do a little sleight of hand to get them back on board. Players will know you're pulling your punches if the Necromancer kills a PC and shocks everyone, and then says, "Now leave and don't come back." The players, they may be relieved that they get to keep playing the characters they've invested in, but they'll know the only reason the Necromancer said that was because you didn't want to ruin everyone's fun. The worst thing you can do as a DM is break their hearts. Everything else can be solved. What to do? Certainly, the Necromancer could kill the party. I mean, this is how parties wipe. This is how a TPK happens. Things had to be bad if a PC got killed, and now they're worse because the party is down a PC. So they're much more likely to lose. There's no right answer. Only you know your players. Yes, if the Necromancer says go and don't come back, the players will know you're pulling your punches. But they get to keep playing the characters they're invested in. You might say, well, now you have a recurring villain. And this is true, but it requires the players to play along. If you kill the entire party, the players know, well, that's what would have happened. That's the real story. And this is satisfying. It preserves suspension of disbelief. But at what cost? Now everyone is bummed out. Which is more important? I don't know. There's no right answer. That's the reason we roll one attack at a time. If one attack takes a PC unconscious, you can switch to another PC, spread the damage around, instead of killing a PC and changing your entire game. Now, this is a reasonable thing to do, especially if you explain your thinking. Hey, who was the last person to damage this golem? Hey, who did the most damage to this golem? Hey, who just attacked the golem's master? All of these are good, reasonable, plausible excuses for the golem to switch its attack to someone else, and they will work. Once you've done this a few times, you start to realize that you can plausibly switch to almost any target and trick the players into thinking it's what the golem would have done, just by the questions you ask. It sounds like you're asking tactical questions, but you're really just giving the players a good excuse to hang their suspension of disbelief on. And it works. This works. If you do it, it will work. There's another solution, far more time intensive, but it also works, and that is track everyone's hit points live. My friend George did this when he ran D&D for us at Last Unicorn Games, and while it was a lot of work for him, basically writing down how many hit points every PC had left after every attack, it meant he was phenomenally well armed to decide who to attack next. In other words, if you know Bob only has 5 hit points left, you're not going to attack him thinking he has 45. Don't get me wrong, it's perfectly reasonable for the golem to attack someone with only 5 hit points. This is D&D, golems attack people, PCs die. The thing we're trying to avoid is that moment when you didn't even realize this was on the table. It's a wildly different thing to attack someone when you didn't even realize they were close to death. If you suddenly ask, before deciding who to attack, hey, how many hit points does everyone have left? No one will want to answer. And yeah, that's because some of them are afraid they'll become the target of the attack. But more common is the player not answering because they believe you will use the answer to take it easy on them. Let the golem do what the golem would do, I usually hear. So I don't ask that question, but I can make intelligent decisions regarding who to attack without doing all the work George did by using magnets under magnetized bases on minis. A character that has no damage has no magnet under them. Once they've taken a little damage, they get a green magnet. Once they are bloodied at half hit points or fewer, they get an orange magnet. Once they are close to death, by whatever metric you choose to measure, maybe 20% hit points or fewer, they get a red magnet. We did this for the good guys and the bad guys, and it was actually awesome. It helped everyone and felt much more realistic. Whatever hit points represent to you, whether physical damage or grit and determination or some combination of the two, you could see when that was wearing out. You would know just by looking. Now we have a couple of ways of avoiding killing a PC if we don't want to. But a PC drops unconscious through normal play and the enemy is still right there. What do we do? Attacking a PC while they're down seems incredibly unsporting to me. For one thing, they instantly accumulate 2 death save failures. So this is something, to be clear, you only do because you're trying to kill the character. I think this comes down to the expectations in your game. I would only do that if I had told my players ahead of time, this is how the bad guys behave. In this style of game, falling unconscious is basically the same as dying, because unless the other heroes act very quickly and effectively, neither of which they are completely in control of, you are going to accumulate a lot of failed death saves very quickly. If we started the game by saying, Listen, folks, I run a game where the bad guys want to win, and they're going to act the same way you do, and for the same reason. They may ignore an unconscious PC under the quite reasonable premise that they are no longer a threat, or they may kill that same PC to remove a potential threat. Then I think you start to put the fear of God into your players. They begin to realize this is not a video game with scripted behavior. The bad guys are smart and will adapt however they need to. So, for whatever reason, maybe bad choices on their part, or your encounter design, or random chance, a PC has died. Now what? Something I've seen DMs do a lot is claim the lethal encounter the players just experienced didn't have to be lethal, if only what comes next is different every time. If only they had listened to the hints the DM gave. If only they had scouted the enemy or talked to someone before attacking them. There's always a reason. The DM can always imagine something the players could have done differently. But something I've learned over 30 years, those conversations aren't usually useful. When a character dies, players often ask, what could I have done differently? They ask this because they are frustrated and unhappy, and if you answer them, all you're doing is giving them something to argue about, and that is not helpful. It's the opposite. It's feeding their anger and frustration. Every time I have answered that, I've regretted it. When I switched to, well, there's always something different you could have done, and otherwise kept my mouth shut, pretty quickly the other players start unraveling the puzzle. The other players start thinking about their options and realizing they took a lot of stuff for granted. When those discussions come from the other players, people react very differently than when it comes from the DM. When it comes from the DM, it sounds like, I told you so. When it comes from the other players, it becomes problem solving and how do we avoid this in the future. If we set expectations, if we explain that D&D is a game and that even a mundane encounter could go south without anyone intending it to, if we explain that the bad guys want to win, if we spread our attacks around to take it easy on the unconscious character, if we track hit points to make intelligent decisions about who to attack, then we reduce the likelihood of an untimely PC death and we minimize the bitterness. I say untimely because death is always a possibility. You knew the job was dangerous when you took it.
Besides, you knew the job was dangerous when you took it.
Apart from death from massive damage and failing 3 death saving throws, there is a third way a character can die, and that is the DM just says, you die, and that's it. Somehow, for some reason, a PC got themselves into a situation where life and death weren't based on chance and die rolls, and your DM informs you that your character is now of interest only to historians. I have done this. It's rare, but it happens. Typically, the character is helpless, and someone else with the power of life or death over them decides dead is better.
Sometimes dead is better.
Or the player does something so spectacularly reckless, no die roll is necessary, like leap into a volcano or plunge into the black portal to save a doomed, I mean literally doomed, friend. I was once playing Jim Murphy's Paladin because he was out and he trusted me to do it. A demon teleported him into hell and gave him an ultimatum. Serve me as a double agent on your team or suffer the consequences. I thought I knew Jim's character pretty well, and so I didn't hesitate. What was there to think about? I said, skin that smoke wagon. And the DM smiled and nodded, and that was it. Jim's Paladin was dead. No die roll necessary. When a player decides to plunge heedless into oblivion, it's rare the player is unaware of the consequences. When my friend Craig ran into the black portal to save Geordie from the abyss, he knew what he was getting into. It was the end of his character, but he died doing something heroic. His choice. Jim's character really didn't have a choice. Nothing about how he had run his PC indicated he would for an instant entertain the notion of making a deal with a real demonic evil. Jim was satisfied I made the same decision he would have made, but there wasn't really any decision. I once killed my friend Phil's PC, the wizard Skoros, and it almost ended the campaign. He was a prisoner at an evil paladin's mercy, and she had been humiliated by the escape of another PC prisoner. Someone had to pay, and this was an explicitly cruel and capricious character with an even harsher master. I decided she would execute Skoros. She could not allow the possibility that a second prisoner might escape. It was the wrong thing to do. I did a whole video on it. You can see how people responded. Overwhelmingly, everyone responding wanted to tell me I did the right thing. The players knew, well ahead of the fatal blow, what was at stake. They had many opportunities they ignored. So what? I do not play this game to execute people's characters. I do not run D&D to say, well, you should have known better. It was not fun, and it almost ruined the game. No amount of sophistry will fix that. In reality, what I should have done was switch the camera view to the other players who were in the middle of making friends with folks who would help them spring the captive PCs from jail. It was entirely my fault, a failure of my pacing and I knew it. The only thing we can do is learn from these experiences and move on. Sometimes there isn't a clear way out, but if we talk to our players about the game we're running, if we make careful choices about how we use our bad guys, I think PC death can be mitigated. Actually, if the necromancer kills a PC and says, "This is the end. Now you will join your friend and your corpses will serve my undying will," it's time to stop the game. Say, we'll pick this up next week, and next week, hand the players a whole different set of high-level characters. Let them pick new heroes to play, and play for 2 or 3 weeks as this new party delves through the other half of the dungeon, until the new party arrives in the Necromancer's Sanctum just after the death of that PC. Now, the heroes aren't down a PC, they're up a whole party of reinforcements, who they just spent a few weeks playing and getting to know, and who can be more colorful and weird, and things they would never normally play. Now 2 groups face the Necromancer instead of 1. You see, there's always a way. That's it, folks. That's the Killing a PC video. I hope there was something in there that was useful or interesting. I have no idea what the next video is going to be because I am going to take a couple of weeks off and prep the D&D stream. This is the D&D stream that we did the Kickstarter in order to fund, in order to get this office, in order to get all this gear and equipment. My players have been waiting for over a year to play. So part of my prep is going to be running D&D for a couple of friends, a small group, a one-shot, nothing elaborate. We will film it, but I'm not going to upload it until after the D&D stream starts. I just need to get the scent back. I don't want the first time I run D&D in over a year to be live in front of at least dozens of people. In the meantime, we're still going to do the stuff that we do just to have fun. We're still going to do Codenames on Tuesday night. Come follow us on Twitch, and we may upload a Codenames video after this one, so you get a running the game video, and then you can't complain about the fact that there is something else live that we did that's fun. Some people like those. We'll probably keep playing NetHack on Twitch, which has no real schedule. It's whenever I feel like it. It's just something I do to blow off steam. It's kind of fun, and we may record a couple of running the game videos because I may just get bored spending weeks getting a campaign ready. I've never really spent that much time preparing a campaign before. Part of that prep work is going to be building the city of capital, some of which I will live stream. I just don't know when. We did already live stream, and I think it's on YouTube, several sessions of me building the Pantheon for Rioja, which is where the city of capital is. And the only reason really we stopped doing that was because I was crunching on the manuscript for Strongholds and Followers, but that's all done, and I am free. I am free now just to work on the campaign. It's going to be super interesting to see what kind of Dungeons and Dragons is produced by me spending literally weeks prepping a campaign. Hopefully it's better than the campaigns that I normally run. We're going to find out together. Any campaign prep that we do live on Twitch, we will upload to YouTube, so you're not going to miss anything. This video and this office and everything is brought to you by Strongholds and Followers. You can pre-order the book. It will be out soon. We're just waiting for it to be laid out. You'll know that we are close to releasing the PDF when I release a sample of the book that has been laid out. The physical copy, the hardcover of Strongholds and Followers, will ship early next year, along with all the miniatures and the stickers and the shirts, all in one big box. That's what's going to show up to your house, and all that stuff is in good hands. There's no risk there. We're literally just waiting for the book to be laid out and launch the D&D stream. So that's what I'm going to go do. I'm going to go work on that. If you want to keep track of Matt Colville and what he's doing on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis between now and the next Run in the Game video, I encourage you to follow us on Twitter, or we have a great Discord that's super cool, and subscribe or follow or whatever on Twitch so that you get alerts when I go live, because there may be a point where I'm going to start working on the city of capital, the greatest city in this or any age. And if you want to see that happen live and be part of the process, you're going to have to follow us on Twitch. Otherwise, we'll upload it to YouTube when it's done. Depending on how things go, depending on whether you follow us on Twitch or not, the next time we see each other, it may be when we launch the D&D stream. It's crazy, but it's going to happen, and it's going to happen soon. Until then, peace out.